Monday morning, we're almost halfway through this month. As always, I appreciate you showing up every Monday. If you haven't done so already, please press a like, subscribe. If you have a chance, you can go back through some of the other episodes that'll kind of give you some context to what I'm talking about now in terms of law of attraction, sharing some of the stories that helped me along the way. I'm from Texas, and my father he grew up in the country. And one of the ways that he used to punish me when I was coming up was he would take me to the country. Now, I grew up, I'm not going to front. I didn't grow up in the hood. I grew up other, in a middle class home. I never missed a meal. Our lights were never off. So when he used to take me to the country, that meant there was no electricity. There was no running toilets, but this is where he grew up at. Right, he grew up on a sharecropping farm. His My grandfather went to prison when my father was 2, which would have been in 1934, and he went to prison for murder. And so my grandmother ended up marrying a sharecropper while he was in prison. That my dad called Mr. Pink. So he used to take me to Mr. Pink's property, and on Mr. Pink's property, he taught me about pump jacks. Now, it wasn't until much later that I heard Zig Ziglar talk about it, and it all made sense because when my dad was trying to teach me the theory of pump jacks, I just wasn't getting it. But he used to take me out to the field, and on this field, there was a well. And in order to get water up from this well, you have to use this pump jack. And, a pump jack, it requires a lot of effort to bring the water up, right? But as you're pumping it, you have to put some water in order for it to attract the water to come up, right? And so, if you kind of think about that in a sense of, sometimes when we start things, we don't realize that we got to put something in order to get something out. In order for the oven to heat up, you got to turn it on. And back in the day when it was wood, you got to put wood in order for it to provide some heat, right? So the same thing with this pump jack. As you are pumping, you got to put some water in there in order to get some water out of it, right? And so my dad, if you know anything about Texas, and he was from Calvert, Texas. And one thing that Calvert, Texas is famous for is this red dirt, and it's hot. Ain't no sun, ain't no shade down there by Calvert, right? So I'm out here in this heat with this pump jack, and he's telling me don't stop pumping. And I'm like, well, how long do I gotta pump until water comes out? And so what he was trying to teach me was that you don't know how long it takes before the water is going to start coming out, but you can't stop pumping. Now, what I didn't know was that you can't stop pumping. Now, here's what happens. When you are using this pump jack and you stop pumping, the water goes back down. Now, there's no way for you to know where the water is because it's underground. You just know when it starts coming out that you've done enough pumping. Well, if you stop pumping, you got to start all the way over again. So when you look at your life and you think about the times that you stop pumping and you have to start all over again. And if you think about, at least for me, when I think about how many times I was right at the precipice of success and I quit. It makes me think about the 2/10. Most races are lost by 2/10 of a second. If you look at races, either if it's a foot race or a car race, the time lapse between first and second place is normally less than 2/10 of a second, meaning had that person just not let off the gas 2/10 of a second before the finish line, had you kept pushing for another 2/10 of a second, you would have hit that moment. And so with this pump jack as you're pumping, right as your arm is tired, and right when you think, what's the point, you quit. And the water goes all the way back down, and you got to start all the way over again. When I tell you how many times I've had to start all over again in my life, if I tell you, had I just kept pumping, had I just kept running, regardless of what somebody else said, regardless of what it looked like, even though I couldn't see the finish line, right? So I'm out here in the sun with my father. I'm 10 years old and it's hot, and I'm with this pump jack. And just as I'm about to stop pumping, he tells me, don't stop pumping. I said, why not? He said, because if you stop pumping, the water goes back down, right? And he comes and he grabs this little tin cup and he pours some water in the top of the pump jack with the siphon. And when he does that, I'm pumping, you can kind of hear the water begin to bubble up. And all of a sudden, this water comes gushing out. And he tells me, now, all you have to do is pump it every now and then. You don't have to pump it as hard because the water is coming out. And if you think about that in terms of the way we are approaching what we consider problems, if we approach them as opportunities and we keep pumping, once we get over the hump, you don't have to work that hard because you put in the work to get the water flowing. But you got to put in the work to get the water flowing. And that's where most of us quit, because we have every opportunity to quit because we can't see what's happening. And when you can't see what's happening, what's the use? But that's where the faith kicks in. And when you've done it before, that's the power of failing and then succeeding, because you have that experience that says, well, I know there's a point to where it feels like it's not going to happen and it's going to happen. But that only comes with experience. And so you have to keep pumping until the water flows. All right, Monday morning, halfway through the month. Appreciate you hanging out with me. We'll do this next week. All right, see you then.